Welcome to XAnalysts. Welcome to Exploring the Energy Markets podcast series. My main mission with this podcast series is to bring complex market subjects, talk to experts, not just the big sound bites, but go granular, talk about some of the details. And the bottom line is to inspire and build and 10x the competency of our young analysts. With that ambition in mind, I'm really excited that I attended a Kpler commodity market briefing in Sydney, and I have with me Go Katayama from Tokyo,
Yes,
from Japan,
Japan.
and to talk about the gas and the LNG markets. You did a very fantastic presentation this morning. It generated a lot of thoughts and ideas. So there's a lot to explore, go and drill down. I hope you will enjoy, and this will leave our viewers with some important and interesting messages.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's my first time in Australia, so as part of the Kpler team, very excited to be in this dynamic market. At Kpler, I cover specifically the LNG markets. From the Kpler platform, we get many good data from our satellite data, and we try to combine that to come up with analysis around the LNG markets. And it's growing very rapidly. In Australia being one of the biggest exporters, it's very important to understand what's happening here, but also what's happening globally in LNG markets. So what excites me is really connecting the dots between the suppliers and the demand points, and then having a view on the prices, where a lot of our clients are really much dependent on a forward view on what could happen to this very dynamic and global market.
Well, Go, a lot of interesting insights. I want to talk a little about the market itself. Of course, I want to explore more about the analysis side, the skills and the competencies. We are at the Kpler commodity, sort of briefing in Sydney. I listened to your presentation with very keen interest. I picked up some numbers. Not a lot of growth in these years, but next year there is a big growth coming. What's driving the LNG growth? And can you explain in a simpler way?
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you for listening to our seminar presentation today in Sydney. It's our first time doing this in Australia, so it's very excited to be here with the team and meeting everybody, our clients, and hopefully future clients on the ground. And again, the LNG market has been very flat the last few years, and it's very much driven by supply. New supply joins the market, adds volumes to the global market. It's very simple. You may think about demand driven, but I think that's more longer term. Shorter term market growth is driven by new supply additions. So the last few years, we didn't see that many new projects come into the market. And that's because LNG projects usually take about 4 or 5 years to construct after final investment decision. Mm-hmm. And 4 or 5 years ago, if you recall, we had COVID-19. Really had a big impact on the supply chain issues, cost escalation. So a lot of projects were delayed. So finally this year, we're starting to see a project in Canada, a project in the US Gulf of Mexico start up. And these are adding new volumes and growing the market. And this is the beginning of a lot of the supply wave that's going to drive LNG markets. As I mentioned about my career, LNG market is also very much event driven. So we have a cycle of every 4 or 5 years. We do have a lot of the supply come into the market. We saw exactly in Australia historically, early 2000s with Gorgon and all the new projects were flushing the markets, and Australia is now one of the largest exporters of LNG. But now the US is having its moment, North America is having its moment. After completing its first wave of US LNG Gulf in 2015, you're having the second and third wave start up finally after COVID is what we're seeing here.
So want to talk about LNG market, gas markets. We'll go a lot more deeper into some of the topics to explore. Share with someone who doesn't know a lot about LNG and gas markets, right? Who are the big players of supply, who are the big demand. Throw some basic numbers to bring the viewers in appreciating the LNG and the gas market. What things come to your mind? Please.
No, absolutely. I'd like to say that LNG is a very expensive industry, so you have to always have big, deep pockets to participate. So ultimately, you end up with one of the major national oil companies. You end up with the international oil companies, Exxon, Shell, BP, who are big players as intermediaries, but also across the entire supply chain. So the numbers of players on the upstream, the downstream may be quite limited. The buyers may be more the utility scale, city gas companies who are actually using the gas for cooking, for generating electricity. So these are very big players at the country level. In Asia, the developing Asia, most likely national oil companies who have a big say in the markets and are able to participate. So that quite limited in the number of players. If you compare it to like the power industry, you have a lot more retailers and players, hundreds of them. The LNG industry, not so much. It is growing over the years. We do have 40 plus countries importing and 20 plus countries exporting, and that's continuing to grow. So it's not the United Nations, but it's obviously a little bit bigger than the World Series,
Okay.
So it's about 60, so many countries. So that is expanding in players, and new trading companies are entering the market, and so new countries are anticipating to import as they want to replace coal with gas generation in terms of decarbonization efforts. So you're starting to see more players, but I would say it's very much oriented towards people with deep pockets and are willing to make bets on billions of dollars in the future. Yeah.
Okay, so it's as you say, deep pockets, growing market. Many countries trading. Possibly you mentioned earlier in your presentation more spot coming, so it will become even more tradable market compared to that. In oil, we have OPEC, which manage the supply, and you talked about the supply market. Is there an OPEC in LNG? Do you see an OPEC coming, some sort of a group coming in future as the energy transition accelerates? Have you thought about something like that?
I think there is a gas exporting community, but it's not as prevalent as OPEC for the moment. But we are going to be centered around the two regions for future exports growth, and that's going to be the US and Qatar.
Okay.
So a lot of the buyers in Asia have to make a decision on how comfortable they are indexing to Henry Hub or the traditional oil linkage that you saw in Qatar. And these are the two forces that are developing expansion projects around the world. And so in a way, you don't need like an OPEC because it's already going to be concentrated in these two regions. So not sure if they're going to collaborate to...
Well, having US being a big player in future probably prevents from something.
Yes.
If US is not the producer and then it's Middle East and Australia is not producing, and if it's only the Middle East and these countries are producing, maybe there is an OPECization of the gas and LNG market, but what I'm hearing, given US role, it is unlikely. Okay, no, that's a good...
I think there's less LNG exporting countries, like 20 plus, than oil producing countries.
Yeah. Okay, now interesting. One technical question I want to, liquefaction, because LNG is a high consumption of energy to liquefy and then, send it across. What things, as an analyst, from a technical point of view, somebody should be picking up and trying to understand rather than just supply demand numbers?
No, absolutely. That's a good question, and it's very technical. And my PO10 days, we had a lot of technical consultants. I was exposed to a lot of this. And for the new projects, at least, as an analyst, you want to predict when these projects will start up. But you have to have a very good understanding of like who's operating the plant. You have to understand what kind of technology, liquefaction process are they using, and the configuration of it. They used to have mega projects of 5-6 million tons per train, right? The economies of scale is a big game here. But now we're going to modular trains. Like, how does that impact?
Modular.
Smaller trains, 10 trains of half a million ton each, as opposed to having mega, big 5 million ton Qatar.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay.
So those things are going to change the timing of the ramp up of the projects and how much there's available to come into the market. So they have to understand, it's not just apples to oranges, but you have to understand the EPC, who's the contractor behind it. Is there enough resources to build all these LNG projects that are building up in the U.S. Gulf of Mexico? Are there any constraints around it? All these things, right? So technically, as an analyst, you have to understand, the liquefaction side quite in a very detailed way to understand at least the timing of when they will come out. And once they're existing plants, when are they going to take maintenance? What is the
Yeah.
procedure for it? What is the timing that they usually take it? Is it during the shoulder season or is it during peak demand season? What are the patterns that we saw before? Also temperature, the cooler it is, the efficiency of the plants go up. So if you're in an Arctic area, you may see higher efficiency and you may see production far above the nameplate capacity. In places like Norway, et cetera, and the pipeline flows are sometimes higher efficiency. So, all these kinds of technical things add up to your final number that you're analyzing. So
you need a lot more depth. Yeah.
yes.
Well, you mentioned about it. What's the next big disruption coming in gas LNG markets? I believe Ukraine crisis was a big disruption which disconnected Europe and Russia system. It was a very good, efficient system of piped gas. What do you think is the next big disruption that can come? I know in your presentation you talked about the Arctic from Russia, and you need those Arc 7 icebreaker kind of ships and vehicles. What's the next disruption one should watch in LNG or gas markets?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. And we always look at disruptions, and sometimes disruptions is good for Kpler because that encourages clients to have more visibility and transparency into the shipping flow. But I think because we're entering this oversupply era in the next few years with all the LNG coming from the US and Qatar, demand is going to have a hard time catching up. So we think that prices will continue to go lower, bearish in the next few years. But how low can it go? And when we get to a point where Asian spot prices are far below $5-6, if that goes that far, there's a lot of the producers lose incentive to start producing. So that's disruptive in a way that where you start to lose production in that such a low LNG price world. So that's going to be very disruptive and very bad news for the suppliers. And they have to wait until demand picks up to an area where the price sensitive buyers come in India and Thailand. To pick up the slack. So it's going to go through that cycle. It's not always perfect, but that's something that I would watch out for. How low will it go?
So supply shut-ins, geopolitical disruptions for sure, which you can't predict. But that's the thing to watch. And Qatar and US is what you mentioned.
Yes.
Okay. So what I'm hearing and understanding, I'm an oil person, right? I've looked at the oil markets for long years. And I think oil markets were also supply driven, as we are noticing. OPEC is managing the supply side because demand side is a little bit lackluster. And you're mentioning that LNG is also driven kind of the same dynamics. I want to ask another question about the market itself, which might give some ideas to the analysts who are looking at the market. There's a lot of seasonality in LNG market, right? Yes. And I noticed on your charts and graphs, something happens in February, March when the numbers go very down. What happens in February, March in LNG markets?
I think you're referring to our Korean inventory numbers. Mm-hmm. So the inventory goes down because of power demand increases for more heating. Gas demand for heating and electricity demand for heating also increases. So that means inventory will go down. So that's the chart that goes down, but usually the demand goes up. For February, because peak winter months, especially in Northeast Asia, Northern Hemisphere Asia, a lot of the gas demand is needed for the heating demand. And same can be said for the summer peak demand as well. So there's a double peak in Northeast Asia for summer peak demand as well as for winter.
So I guess for an LNG and a gas analyst, understanding the seasonality is a very big factor, and understanding the weather and the climate sort of related aspect is a very big thing. Is that
absolutely
a big one?
Absolutely. Power prices, we won't go too much into detail, but really dependent on the weather. Is it going to rain? Is it going to be sunny? Is it going to be cold? Is it going to be hot? So having clarity on the weather forecast is always difficult to predict, but having the best clarity analytics around the weather is very, very important. But I would also add that LNG industry also has fundamental drivers that are very unique to each country. So the analyst has to study what drives that gas demand for each of them. So for China, you may have domestic production and pipeline imports on top of the traditional demand, and what you don't make up for it, you need LNG imports. So you have many options. So you have to really study on the supply side what their options are, on the demand side, what's driving it. Is it power sector, non-power sector? what kind of fuels in the power sector is gas competing with. I mentioned earlier about the nuclear outages in Japan driving LNG demand in Japan in 2011, but there are different drivers for each country, and more countries are joining the LNG market. There's over 40 plus countries now, and some are rich, some are poor, some have very different economics, very price elastic markets versus inelastic markets. As you know, Japan imports more on the long-term contracts, so the price elasticity is very low compared to India or Pakistan or Bangladesh. Have lower credibility, so they have to import more spot cargoes at a higher cost. And so that's more sensitive to what spot prices will go down or up, depending on the market.
That's a very fascinating topic, and I'll get into that, Go. But I think you mentioned just a while ago that US is having its moment, right? We are in Australia. I'm sure you engage with a lot of Australian clients and customers.
Yes.
When did Australia had its LNG or gas moment? It is still continuing. Will it continue going forward? What's the future of Australia gas LNG sort of markets?
Yes, I think it's still continuing, but I think the LNG projects in Australia ramped up in the early 2000s, in the mid 2000s. So the ramp up has already concluded for now. You may have some additional backfills of existing projects in Darwin, and also have some further additional volumes coming out of Australia, but not the growth that you see in the US, where US will add 20 million tons of production this year and then next year as well. Not to the level of that growth. So everything comes in cycles. It's very much event driven. And some countries will have their moment, US, maybe Australia, and then Qatar will also add their expansion projects. But Australia, regardless of them expanding their production or not, will remain a very, very important supplier of LNG to Northeast Asia, particularly in Japan, China, Korea. So that will never change. As a baseload LNG
is still Australia.
Very important.
So let me ask something different. All the LNG and the gas market analysts in Australia, in Asia Pacific, what three things would you say that they should be thinking about in order to sharpen their analysis, in order to get their forecasts more right than wrong? What three things come to your mind from a future angle that 1, 2, 3, this is what LNG and the gas analysts across the region should be thinking about?
Yes, very good question. I don't know if I could come up with three, but the two that come off the top of my head is demand is very volatile. So as a supplier, you have to think about how demand will formulate over the years. And China, being the largest importing country now, is the biggest question mark, short term and long term. So getting China correct is the most important thing. So if you have a Chinese background or any background in energy analytics in China, it's such a strength. It's going
to be good.
Because not a lot of data comes out from the China side. So you have anything to value added that you can bring to the table on the Chinese markets is always a plus. And if people want to see more clarity on how that's going to turn out over the years, because it's not always going to be a clear straight increase of 5%, 6% a year. We did see this year Chinese LNG demand have 11, 12 months straight of a reduced LNG year on year. And you have
we're seeing the same thing on the oil side, so I think you're spot on that getting a grip on understanding China is key. You had some second point as well.
Second point is the growing spot market. LNG has been traditionally linked to term contracts, so a lot of it was really much a long-term game with long-term credibility of buyers. That's why you had Japan and Korea and Taiwan as the first few buyers, but now it's expanding. And US volumes are a game changer because these are FOB flexible cargoes that can make its way over to the Atlantic or to the Asia based on how high profit they can make for each basin. So it's becoming, the US LNG is globalizing LNG, and that's going to increase the spot volumes. So you have to have a very good idea of what's driving the spot markets on both sides of the basin. So even if you're a trader in Asia, what happens in Europe if you have a cold winter and they have to compete with Asian cargoes? You have to know what's happening in Europe. Europeans also have to know what's happening in Asia. It's very much a globalized market in terms of the spot cargoes.
I want to drill a little bit more on what you just mentioned. I think I had not appreciated this, of course, from my oil background, but US is more FOB market and making a game changer. Is it very different how LNG was sold by Australia or other suppliers? What's the key difference which US can do something different now, which others were not able to do?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. It's an evolution of the LNG markets as well. Traditionally, because LNG was sold long-term to Japan, Korea, oil linkage, all the contracts were linked to oil prices.
Correct, yeah.
And the idea is you displace gas, oil generation with gas generation.
Okay.
We don't see that too much in action anymore, but it's something that everybody's very used to on a contractual basis. So the oil system, percentage slope Brent to Brent is still a very strong part of the equation. And people understand it as an industry. So that's something that people are comfortable with. And that was the equation. If markets are very tight, the slopes would be very high, markets are very loose, you see a big supply, then it becomes a buyer's market, and buyers get a better slope to Brent.
I've heard slopes 15, 17, is that the numbers
yeah, well now
currently?
It's even lower because there's a new supply push, so maybe 11 to 13% you could
is
see.
the slope.
You could see coming in, so it's very much different. So that was a traditional idea of LNG, but the US is very much flexible. Destination flexibility is a big game changer.
Destination flexibility is a
Yes.
key thing. Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Go. I think this is a topic which probably is becoming quite complex, right? And let me add another color to it. As a gas LNG analyst, I'm sure linkages with oil, which you just mentioned. I'm sure there's a linkages with coal market, power market, now LNG. Trucks in China has a linkage with diesel market. Maybe there is a linkage with metals mining. So how much you want to focus or you focus on cross commodity understanding? Is it a big topic these days to understand others commodities, or pretty much stay focused on gas and LNG dynamics?
Absolutely, that's a very good question. And I think the answer is somewhere between, you have to look at every country as a very different characteristic and dynamic. I would argue that like India, China are very price sensitive. So the indexes of LNG competing with diesel, you mentioned LNG trucks, and that's very important. India with like naphtha and other oil products, how LNG competes with that will impact your final demand number. So those are countries, the cross-commodity analysis becomes very, very important. And we as Kpler cover other commodities than LNG, so we work very closely with our other friends and partners in the coal team, on the oil team, and to figure out those ideas. But that's not always the defining driver of some of these markets. I would argue that for China, like GDP numbers, growth is a very big...
so macro numbers.
Macro numbers are very important as well. Obviously, the cross-indexation is very important, but China's a big market. So the 5% growth becomes 4%. It's a big reduction in demand. It's a big reduction in LNG imports. So there are different drivers for each country that the hierarchy is quite different. And we have to understand and study why the outcome is the way it is. And that's the beauty of the bottom-up approach to analyzing countries.
I know there is no one answer, but I'll still will force you to pick one. As a gas and LNG market, as an analyst, which other commodity market you should study the most? Pick one.
I think oil, because LNG wants to be like oil, and but LNG is not really a commodity yet, because if 70% of the market is linked to term contracts with 10, 20 years of length, that's not very, very different from oil.
Okay.
And that's one thing that we were talking about AI and all these technologies earlier, and analysts could be replaced with all the new technology, but I think the LNG industry is still very much, even with the US coming in, a lot of it is linked to long-term contracts. So you have to understand the storylines behind each of the contracts, and I think those kinds of dynamics are very much important.
So you mentioned connecting the dots, and here at XAnalysts, we'll be talking about all kinds of different topics and competencies and providing a lot of knowledge to future analysts, right? So what is something that you would like to share or...
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I think is very interesting is that my journey as an analyst is really a reflection of how the LNG markets have evolved. And I don't want to do a long history lesson today, but originally, I really wanted to do nuclear energy, because in Japan, nuclear is a big, a chunk of the power there.
Yes.
But in 2011, there was the Fukushima accident in Japan. And back then, I was not in the energy industry. I was actually a researcher for the New Yorker magazine. You may have read some of the journals coming out of New York. And we were covering the aftermath of the Fukushima disaster. And nuclear reactors, which made about 30% of electricity in Japan, had to be shut down and they had to replace that, to keep the lights on with LNG from Qatar. But what I found out, what was happening was Qatar was supposed to send that LNG to the US, United States, because the United States, remember now, is a large exporter, but they originally were importing LNG. So they converted the import terminals to the export terminals. But the US was at the same time having a shale gas revolution. So they didn't need the expensive LNG from outside because they own their own production. So Japan was able to keep their lights on because what was happening in the dynamics there. And I quickly found out, what is this LNG thing? And I moved over to grad school in New York, and I started to understand the shale gas revolution in the Marcellus was happening right in the backyard in Pennsylvania. So I was like, this is very interesting. And I think one of the key topics I would love to talk about is just understanding your strengths as an analyst, and language and culture. That's always a very big one. For me, at least being Japanese and living in America, I realized there's a lot of interest from Japan. We don't produce a lot of oil and gas in Japan, so we have to import it as an island nation. So I connecting the dots, I'm thinking, as somebody who grew up in the US, but has interest in Japan and the connectivity between it, there's a big opportunity for me to pursue this LNG career other than being a nuclear scientist at some point. So that was a big jump, and where I saw that opportunity. So I'd like to say, just as LNG and commodity markets are very much event-driven, like my journey where I started off as LNG, right after graduate school, starting as a consultant at Potent & Partners in New York, was also very much event-driven by what supply and demand flows and the changes there were happening. Because Japan was the largest LNG importer in the world. These LNG projects are they cost a lot of money. So you need very strong, credible buyers to back up the projects for your project financing. So Japan has been importing LNG since like 1969 from Alaska. It's a very long tradition, very credible country. And I've happened to find a combination where that dot happened to be very bold for Japan, and more imports to Japan was needed after the Fukushima accident. And so that was the connection that really molded my journey.
Fantastic insights. So I'd like to know, is there something that you wish you had learned very early in your career that really helped you expand your knowledge and your expertise?
This kind of ties back to the cultural thing again, but being Japanese in Asia, we're always trained to have the right answers. But as a good analyst, you don't always have the right answers. So now I realize you may not have all the answers, but it's always important to be curious and ask all the questions possible. And that's a very different education from what I was experienced in Japan, where you're always supposed to get really high scores and get the right answers. This may be a reason why you don't see a lot of people asking questions in Asia. But it's very different. You get more points for saying something in the classroom than the score. The participation score really matters quite a bit in the American context. So I think as analysts, you have to be always asking these questions. They may not always be the right questions, but it will lead you eventually to adding more expertise. But I was really, in the beginning, I was in a room with all the C-suites and very important people. I felt like I didn't have the right background or the information. They just throw you right in there. It was very good training, but I wasn't asking enough questions. I was curious about the markets for sure, but if I were to really look back, there is no such thing as a stupid question. I think the stupidest question is the one that you don't ask. So I keep thinking that's one of the key things that I would go back to. And then on the logistical part of things, I would always try to invest more on my Excel and data analytical framework. I did come from more of a qualitative policy background. So that's something I always lacked around, in the beginning. So that's something I would also add to the, and on top of the asking questions element.
So I would like to know more about your personal story. And I want to know, was there a specific time where you got your analysis right? And how did that impact you? And anytime you got it wrong, how did you deal with that?
It's hard to always get everything right. And you learn from a lot of the mistake that you make in your analysis. But I think what makes the analysis really good is we're always learning from what you got wrong. And which areas are easier to predict. Some recent examples would be demand side is very difficult to predict, except the peak months. Most countries in Asia import more fuel in the peak summer months and in the cold winter months, and those are pretty easy to predict. Where it's difficult is the shoulder months, where the demand lays off in the fall and the spring. and how far will it taper off? The lows are very hard to predict. And so one of the cool things is with a team, I think this is where the team really comes into play. We discuss, what are the key variables that we missed? What are the drivers? What are all the drivers that could have affected the outcome in the markets, and lay it out and check one by one, and we get to overlay that. And so it's always a continuous improvement of modeling, back testing our forecasts. Our clients also love to see, not how accurate we are, but like what did we do to improve that? And that always adds new capability and new different unique ideas to traditional modeling, which I think is the most value add to the clients. What is the correlation between an outcome and an input? And should we ignore that? Should we add something in? What's something we're missing? And that discussion, I think, is the most rich and more the most interesting part of the job. So I always look forward to looking at the outcomes and back testing our analysis. My favorite things that I love is that the energy industry is so big that not one person knows everything about the energy industry. That's one of the key things I learned, when going into the industry. So if you have little segments of ideas, if it's LNG, if it's natural gas, oil, and you have another background, finance, econ, political science, and you are able to combine those two different things and make it your own, you may become the expert in that one field,
Hi Go, we have talked a lot about the technical details, modeling, data,
Yes.
right? But there is, we touched upon some soft aspects of, becoming a good analyst. But there is team dynamics, right?
Yes.
And this is a competitive industry. Sometimes people can get insecure. They want to guard their Excel spreadsheets and not share. So collaboration and competition go hand in hand. So I want to pick your brains on, I'm sure you have a big team, how to build a good team of analysts, and what message you want to give to the analysts themselves so that they really become a team player.
No, that's a very good question. And I think about that all the time because we're growing our team as we speak. And Kpler is always growing the team with different backgrounds. And I think a strong team is a team with all the different backgrounds that's needed to analyze, specifically for our industry, the LNG industry. And that covers anything from, the economics of the projects, like the policy side of things is a little bit more qualitative, but also the quants, the data side of things.
Oh, yeah?
The technical side of things, how does it relate to the environment? All of these different things have to be taken into account when you're analyzing energy markets and LNG markets. So not one person will have all of those backgrounds on the technical side, on the qualitative side. So the idea is to find the right amount of people that covers everything together as a team. And that's very important, to have different backgrounds. Just because they don't have the same background as you, that doesn't mean you don't dismiss them. I think it makes it stronger. I think the more the people kind of join from different backgrounds. I joined from a policy background in my grad school. In energy markets, obviously the quants are very important, but sometimes the outcomes are more influenced by the qualitative policy side of things, as you see in geopolitics.
Yeah, these days, yeah.
Above ground.
Above
risks.
ground.
So I think it's a combination of having a strong team with both of those ideas. But I would also add that having experience like on actual businesses, the service side is always great, but having actual experience building projects, building infrastructure, dealing with government, trying to put steel on the ground. I think those experiences will also be very helpful as an analyst when you're observing markets as well, because that know-how on the ground will also be a big plus. So a little bit of both, experiences both sides is great. I started on the service side, joined organization, and then came back into the service side. But having both of those will be very good as well. So a good balance of backgrounds, qualitative and quantitative, will make a very good, strong team.
Now, I think you touched upon something which I relate to a lot, that we need both. We need a lot of industry, operations, kind of people coming into the research and the analysis side. There is a lot more, money here. And equally, people who have been long in the research and the analysis, like the service side, go back to the industry. And I think that kind of a cross movement is not just good for the analysts, but in general will produce high quality analysis, high quality decision making. Is just good for I guess everything.
Yes.
So no, fantastic topic, that the team aspect. of respecting the diversity, welcoming the difference of opinions, because a good analysis is all about debating, right? Disagreeing with each other with respect, but still aligning and finding something which no one person can figure out is our complex markets. Let's conclude. I think fascinating questions, fascinating answers. We can always, keep talking for long. What 3 things at the end you would like somebody to remember from this conversation? And my goal, as I say at XAnalysts, is to inspire the joy and the passion for analysis, right? How to keep it live. What 3 things would you say, closing Go?
Yeah, I think to wrap it up, just really, there's 3 things. There's really no such thing as a dumb question. Keep asking.
No dumb question. Keep asking
all the questions. 70% of success is just showing up.
Show up.
If you're thinking, maybe I shouldn't go, or I think you should always show up and see what happens. And also, I'd like to just say that the spot market is really growing. It's very dynamic. And so the ship tracking, the vessel tracking will become even more important as we go, as more US LNG comes in. So from an analytical point, we're going to go through much more shifts and more analysis to be done in the spot market. So that's something I'm very excited for. So
despite the bearish view which you talked about, is it still a good time to be as a gas LNG analyst?
Yeah, absolutely. The low prices will instigate higher prices eventually. So I think there's ups and downs, and be able to analyze it, I think it's a quite exciting tenure. So thank you very much.
Well, on that basis,
thank you.
Go, fantastic. Thank you very much. Hope you have a safe travels. You had a good trip in Australia.
Yes.
And look forward to you talking once again.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Empowering analysts, transforming markets.